Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone and welcome to the Caffeine Stream. My name is CB Robertson, and today I was granted permission to share a conversation I had with a friend of mine who we'll call John. This is one of the tail end conversations of a string of conversations I've been having for the last 2 years within our Homer group. And the tail end of Homer group, after reading the Iliad, the Odyssey, Adam Nicholson, Greg Nosh, listening to Harmar Brereton, and rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey, we choose 2 books of our own kind. And John decided to read some books more in the archaeological direction, more in the historical, anthropological movement of peoples works. And we talk a little bit about that and the relevance of this anthropology and this history to Homer and our sense of connection with the past. So, without further ado, I'll bring you into the conversation, which begins a little bit media res because of where I hit the record button. So enjoy.
Because I feel like I think you're right. Bap is related, and he's writing at a much higher level than his critics give him credit for. Um,
Well, I mean,
and
in selective breeding, he's writing under his own name as a
right,
Yale PhD candidate and
right.
writing a PhD thesis that, by all accounts, has been fairly well received. Even if people who disagree with it, they're like, "Oh yes, this is very much what a Straussian would write about Plato."
I would
Um,
love to. I would pay money the way people pay money to watch like UFC fights. I would pay money to watch the doctoral defense like round, you know.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't because he'd either use his real accent or his fake accent, and they're equally irritating. But man, that guy is a podcaster. That guy's a podcaster and a half. Like even I
Yeah.
think even people who don't like him would have to admit that the podcast is a good podcast.
Yeah. His voice is but like once you get used to it, it's like you just don't even notice it anymore.
It's a
Um
two-way street as well, though. If you listen to like the first episode and then you listen to how he is now, he's clearly dialed it back very hard.
yes, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
But then if you listen to like surreptitious recordings of his Yale years, which I, being extremely online, have occasionally seen on Twitter,
Oh.
um, you realize, you know what? If I naturally sounded like that, then I too would put on a fake voice for my podcast.
The only recording I've heard of him in his real voice is of that lovely little back and forth with Bill Crystal. Um have you seen that?
I don't think I've seen that one. I've seen one which was like a recording of a lecture, and he's off screen speaking to the guy who's giving the lecture.
Okay.
So that might be the same one, it might not.
You should do yourself a favor and look up just Costin Alamario, Bill Crystal. Um Bill Crystal is giving some presentation about something or other, and at the end he's taking questions, and Costin is one of the people who asks him questions at the end, and it is
Yeah, I guess I can I should
beautiful.
circle
It's
back because before you hit record we were talking about Pindar, and I was
yes,
saying
yes,
that
yes, yes. I'm sorry, but
that the
let's just tie
specific
in.
I'm just to make this more interesting for anybody who's listening later rather than
Sure.
getting kind of like a dated look at niche internet micro celebrity voice physiognomy. Uh, but yeah, so
Right.
I said that I'd kind of read enough of Drew's response to Beckwith, and for people listening, that's Drew's book on the arrival of the Indo-Europeans, um, held up and against the horse, the wheel, and language view by that's
Mhm.
not Beckwith, is it? No,
Anthony.
Beckwith wrote Empires of the Silk Road. Yeah, David Anthony. When I said
Yeah,
response to Beckwith, I meant response to David Anthony.
gotcha.
Um, and Drew's book is uh, the Indo-Europeanization of Europe. So it's is military progress in the Indo-Europeanization of Europe, something like that. Militarism, and the Indo-Europeanizing of Europe. Uh,
Hmm.
um, and I've read enough of that to get what the thesis is, and I agree with it in some particulars and disagree with it in others, which is my right to do as an uneducated amateur reading two PhD level historians who are eminent in their field. I can pick which one of them I agree with because, I do my own research,
That's the
right?
Scott Adams test for science too. Does the thesis or the hypothesis or the conclusion agree with your own biases? If it does, it's good science. If it does not, then there's probably something wrong with the statistical
Well, to
analysis.
to circle back to BAP, I think there's a really good reason that he prefers the Drew's account over the David Anthony account, and the reasons for that are twofold. I think the first one is he prefers it ideologically and aesthetically, i.e., the in the Drew's account, the coming of the Indo-Europeans was the imposing of a tiny group of young warrior aristocrat men over a much vaster population of people that they effectively enserfed using their new military technologies, their fast chariots, their fast horses, their bronze weapons, which obviously is much more flattering to, I guess, the BAP project, the BAP worldview than Drew's is. An enormous load of people developed, like a bolus of population developed on the steppe because this group of people evolved the ability to digest lactose better and got more domesticates. And through population pressure, they kind of combination warred with, interbred with, trade with, and migrated into lands held by settled people in Europe and the rest of the kind of swath of Indo-European world.
I feel
And
like
I
there
think,
are historical examples of both kinds of cultural
yeah,
dominance. So, with the Indo-Europeans, theoretically, it could go either way. But with the heroic accounts that we associate culturally, it does sort of tacitly lend more prima facie
yeah.
believability to the Drew's account. But both
Well,
seem plausible to me.
yeah. Well, the other one is that they disagree on the date of horse riding, which is actually really fundamental. Like um, it sounds like it's a tangential point, right? Like
No,
I
that seems
believe in this,
crucial to
yeah. And
Drew's
and the
in
and
particular.
the thing is that so Anthony marshals this evidence for bitware, and a lot. You remember I said I got about a third of the way through militarism and the Indo-Europeanizing of Europe, and decided, oh, now I know his argument. I lost interest, and the reason I lost interest was that it was then like 200 pages of argument about patterns of bitware on horses' teeth, which,
Yeah.
but yeah. So I actually think that Drews is probably in the right on this one, um, because if he's not, there's a lot of weird military questions that are opened by this.
Hmm.
So you need there to be like a 2,000 year long period where that's not 2,000 year long period. A significant period. I can't do the mental maths in my head. It's very early where I am. But you end up with a significant period where people are sort of riding horses for funsies and riding horses as civilians, but in a military context, they are only ever riding chariots. And the explanation for that in the when I say domestication of horses, I'm specifically talking about the like horseback riding,
Right.
so which Drews thinks comes late and comes after selective breeding of horses to get bigger, and which Anthony thinks was kind of always fundamental to the expansion of the Indo-Europeans because he says you couldn't herd horses without having horses. And we know that the bowtie culture, who were like a predecessor to a predecessor of the Sredni Stog or like Yamnaya peoples, were using horses as a large part of their diet. And I disagree with this. If you have the dog and you have like rope technology and you have like at
Fences.
the end of the yeah, well at the end of the day, right? You seen those East African hunters where they like have to run down an animal. So A, your horses are going to hurt themselves. B, they're going to
Especially
be
if you're giving them
semi-domestic.
food.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to be semi-domesticated in the way that they'll want to stick together and they'll want to stick with the people who are taking care of them. And to see if you do lose a horse, right? Like you and the other fit men, have a way of getting that horse back, right? It's not going to be very fun. It's a lot less fun than like being a cowboy on the open range, right? But you can actually chase a horse,
Yeah.
especially on the steppe where it's got nowhere to hide, right? You will run down that horse, right? Like it's just going to take you all day and really suck, and it
Yeah.
might not even be worth doing. But yeah, so that the reason that that matters is that it changes the value of non-aristocratic men in a conquest situation, right? So if you're the Indo-Europeans and your big advantage is your horse-drawn chariots, right? Well then, yeah, you end up with a much more Bronze Age inflected view of the world, right? So again, painting with broad strokes, I think Drews has a view of the world that's more and to bring it back to the topic of discussion, Drews has a view of the world that's more compatible with the heroic Greek sagas, the heroic Indian sagas actually being literally true, right? Whereas Antony's view is a much more similar to in mental model, right? We've gone from the Bronze Age to kind of like the Huns, right? We've got an entire people group under arms moving with their yurts, right? And some of them are even riding on the backs of horses, but then when it comes to combat, the horses are too skittish and small to give much of an advantage. The proper saddle hasn't been invented yet, so they're not really. It's not a good fighting platform. So these guys will, ride up on their horses to the settlement that they're going to attack, and then they'll dismount, and then they'll attack it with their fancy battle axes.
That's sort
I
of
think probably
a
both
Native
both happen at different
American.
times.
That's sort of like a Native American raiding mode of combat. The horse is still critical for logistical reasons to get you there quickly, in almost like a ancient blitzkrieg kind of way. But
Yeah,
you don't need to be fighting from horseback. I've heard one economist, I don't remember who it was, made an argument that the stirrup was what created the like feudal lord system in the
yeah.
United States.
I've heard that argument too. I'm a stirrup denialist, right? Because like
Yeah.
I don't doubt that the stirrup made heavy cavalry more effective, but
Mhm.
you've got the
It
use
seems overly
of
simplistic.
well, the use of massed heavy cavalry predates the stirrup, right?
Right.
And there's all these arguments, often from people who haven't really ridden on horses very much, frankly, and who definitely haven't ridden horses using like historical period gear, because the number of people who've done that can probably be counted on two hands, right?
Right.
And they all say that the stirrup made it possible to control your horse without using your arms, which left your arms free for fighting, which is dumb because you've got knees. You've got heels, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it made it better. I'm sure it made it easier. And then the real slam dunk one is wow, I wonder how the Persian Empire conquered all of their neighbors. Wouldn't have had anything to do with heavy cavalry, would it? Right? That thing that you've just told me is reliant upon this particular invention.
Cataphracts
And
did not exist. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think you can do a thing where you track the stirrup, and this is where Beckwith, who I was mentioning earlier, Christopher Beckwith, Empires of the Silk Road, is a good guy to look at on this because you can indirectly track the development of mounted warrior aristocracy via the move of the stirrup around the world. But that's not because the stirrup was somehow essential to that thing's existence. It's that the stirrup is the kind of thing that kind of culture is naturally going to invent and export everywhere, and it
Yeah.
has a common origin on the steppe. Incidentally, in a period much later than we're discussing here, so everybody agrees the stirrup hadn't been invented. The debate is whether between Drews and Anthony is whether the bit had been invented, which is a
Mm,
lot more fundamental because you can
gotcha.
you can absolutely control a domesticated animal without a bit, and in fact, like the traditional way of camel riding uh, as late as the Iron Age was to control them with a stick that you move them from place to place by tapping one side or the other side of their face with a stick. Same thing with people. Nobody puts a bit in an elephant, right? Putting a bit in an elephant's mouth would be a very, very bad idea, right? They use a stick, right?
Right.
But you probably aren't riding at high speed into the enemy while shooting arrows at them while controlling the direction of your horse with your knees and a stick, right?
Yeah. That would be you need a couple more hands to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally.
Um, but yeah, like I say, I think Drew's is an important corrective because I think a lot of if they're aware at all of the Indo-Europeans, Aryans, Yamnaya peoples, battle axe culture, corded ware culture, coming to various regions and spreading their culture, they have a model, especially if they're European, that is kind of implicitly, oh, this is just like when the Huns came. This is just like when the Alans came. This is just like when when the Mongols came, right? And we're talking about people who, in certain ways, had a similar lifestyle, although less nomadic, like not full-bore nomadism. They didn't have the composite bow. They didn't have. They almost certainly didn't have large numbers of mounted archers, right? The
Yeah.
weapon
But they're
of
still
these
pastoralists and like tribal
well,
military culture, like the
they're semi-pastoralists. Drews gets into this a little bit as well. But he doesn't claim that Anthony is making the argument that these people lived the lifestyle of like specialist steppe pastoralists like the later Mongols, but they were agriculturalists too, right? If you look at the common languages that the common words that descend from Proto-Indo-European words, right? Yeah, there's all the words. The one of the big arguments actually for the chariot stuff is that no family of languages has such a developed language for talking about axles and wheels and spokes and halters and like all the elements of. And now you could turn around if you don't think that the chariot was essential, qua um, Antony, and say, well, yeah, but they were traveling around everywhere in enormous carts. And it's like that's true, but the Middle East had carts as well, and the Middle East has some indigenous words for some elements of a cart, but like the the vocabulary sophistication, like Indo-Europeans talking about wheeled things is like Eskimos talking about snow,
right.
you know? So
Yeah.
so this argument there. But they also have words for various agricultural products in common. Now you could claim they were getting them all by trade, but it seems a little bit unrealistic. And certainly the first people to live where the Indo-Europeans were living were not doing pastoralism because it hadn't been invented yet. So they were living
Gotcha.
along the rivers and doing a lot of fishing, a lot of farming.
Hunter
And this is you were
gatherers.
talking you made a Native Americans comparison here, which I think is quite illustrative, really. And I strongly recommend Petty Linkler's books as well. I think it's Indigenous Empire. His one on the Comanche I've heard is less good, but I haven't read it. But the recommended one for the Comanche is always Feuerbach, I think his name is. Feuerbach. Anyway,
Okay.
because they very much did the David Anthony style thing. A lot of people have this idea, again, if they're familiar with the debate between these two authors, all 50 people arguing on the internet on Twitter about this particular niche topic. And it's, incredible downstream effects on the particular kind of racism that you use. Um,
Right.
but yeah, so
Well, it
so a
seems
lot
like it would lend itself to two different kinds of aristocracy, which is what's striking to me about like was going through my head in the debate. It was like, were these people riding horses or were they riding chariots? Is chariots seem like a very expensive kind of technology, like an F-16
oh
jet
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
something like that. Whereas just riding a horse seems much more accessible to the layman. So if
yeah.
you have a society full of people riding horses, you would end up with a almost Robin Hood ethos of
Yeah, yeah.
the yeoman freeman soldier, which lines up with Achilles, the man who is an aristocrat by merit, rather than the Agamemnon who's an aristocrat by convention and wealth, which is the
So
corresponding
I think that
chariot.
that's an interesting point. But again, if you another use of selective breeding and birth philosophy coming up here, right? Because it very strongly makes the point that this idea of an aristocracy of merit, this ideology of the aristocracy being superior by nature, which is the thing that eventually results in Cosin's telling in
Mhm.
philosophers becoming aware that oh, actually things can just be things by nature. There's a nature separate from the nomos, right?
Right.
That is exactly what I would want everybody to believe if I was an aristocrat, right? You know? So
Yes,
yeah, yeah. So
that's funny.
so so
But it doesn't work in
actually,
Agamemnon's favor in the case of the Iliad, which makes the Iliad sort of
well,
a subversive book.
well, yeah, but I guess that's the tension because the aristocracy are saying we're like Achilles, we're superior to you by nature, we're
Mm.
not superior, and then the Greek society
But it
itself
always
contrasting
leaves the door
itself.
open to a challenge.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Whereas,
what if I am actually better than you? Yeah, but then
yeah,
that's there's a section in Selective Breeding where he goes into this, where some general for propaganda value, um, basically has a bunch of Persian war dead stripped so they can look at how crap their physiques are. And he says, like, look, these guys are Persian nobles, but they look basically they're, I'm forcing them to show physique. The physique is bad. Their argument that they should own our land is invalid, right? To put it in online terms. But so the Greeks consciously defined themselves over, and especially the Greek kind of aristocratic oligarchy defined itself against democracy on one hand and kingship on the other. As you know, in the kingship, there's the king and a very small aristocracy and a big population of serfs, and in a democracy, everybody's a serf and they're all just sort of a teeming mass. Ignore for a second like Athens with its like tiny. I think 1/4 of Athenians were free people, and of them,
Sounds about right.
half would be male, and probably a third of that number would be old enough to vote and meet the property requirements, right? So Athens was a society that's entirely built on slaves. And Burckhardt's, I think it's called the Dorian Age
I mean,
on the
Nietzsche makes that
Dorians.
point too. It's like the
Yeah,
ideal of the free society rests upon a slave class, and if the equality ideology spreads too far and reaches the slaves, you have a contradiction at a social level that will end in a
yeah,
whole lot of blood, was Nietzsche's
yeah.
prognosis.
Yeah. Speaking as a Christian, I think that the most devastating takedown of Nietzsche is actually when you do anthropology. He's like, it's a slave morality. And that's not a myth that Christianity has been particularly eager to disabuse people of, because it also fits the Christian self-conception to be like, look, it was even more impressive that we took over the Roman Empire because it was the religion of the powerless and the lowly, and also we're the religion of the powerless and the lowly, and we're the people who care about the powerless and the lowly, unlike everybody else in the world. And then you actually look at the modern like sociology that's been done in how Christianity takes over the Roman Empire, and it basically comes up through the middle. It's a religion of the middle class. It's like not the upper aristocracy, but not like slaves either. And this is where you get the like Celsus complaining that there are too many Christians in the Roman army, right? Because it's like what kind of people were serving in the late Roman army, right?
Right, middle class.
Middle class people. He bitches about them being too good at business as well. He's like he's like it's basically the the kind of yeoman farmer person. Maybe not so much farmer because Christianity did diffuse out of the cities, but it's like the urban working, not so poor. Generally, that's not to say there weren't slaves. Like we got the letter from Philemon, right? So like we
Sure.
know
I mean,
that we
there's
know there
always,
were slaves who became Christian, but that
yeah.
seems to have been the directionality seems to have been the other way around, in that the slave would get interested in the Christianity of the small slaveholder, and that's why, again, if you read the letter of Philemon, it's a controversy about, you know, you should probably free this slave Philemon. I know that you're a Christian, and he's a Christian too now. Have you considered freeing him? It's like, okay, so the very fact that the letter to Philemon exists testifies to the fact that Philemon's owner is also Christian, at a time at
Yeah.
which most people are not Christian. Which direction do you think that went? Do you think Philemon, the slave, convinced his master to become a Christian?
You
Or do you
you
think
probably
maybe
know a
the
lot
other way
more.
around?
You probably know a lot more about the spread of Christianity in Roman and Greek areas than I do. But my understanding of the spread of Christianity in the more Nordic areas
Entirely
is
top
that
down.
is that well, it was not just top down. It was not very theologically based either. Like it would be based on um, convenience, and the converts didn't demonstrate a great deal of, shall we say, theological depth. My favorite story, kind of, comes from Orkney Inga Saga in 999. A certain king of Norway had just converted to Christianity,
Yeah,
and he was,
I think it's Hark on the Good,
was this the one
maybe.
who drew his sword on a local lord's son and said the entire island is Christian now, or the son gets it? And
I think so, but then that's exactly
yeah.
the same as Charlemagne, right? And nobody would claim that Charlemagne was, in fact, in the Western Church, Charlemagne is a saint. Like we Orthodox kind of dispute that a little bit, but we don't dispute it because we think he was bad to go to war with the Saxons. We dispute it because we think he introduced a bunch of theological errors that percolated through the Catholic Church. And
Mhm.
nobody would argue that Charlemagne wasn't very committedly Christian. He's from a family that had been Christian for generations at that point. You know, it's
Yeah,
like
but what I'm saying is that the someone can be very dedicated and devoted in their Christianity, and also profoundly wrong in their understanding of Christianity. And
Yeah, that's true. That's
like
true. I mean,
so just because like you're saying, Charlemagne was undoubtedly sincere, and perhaps Hakon the Good was even sincere. He said, "I'm going to serve it, and I know how to serve a god, and this is how you do it." Sword. Um,
yeah.
and it's like, but does their dedication, is that evidence of the true nature of the religion that they are attempting to spread? That's what I would say. I'm not so sure about that. So if you look at the historical evidence and say, well, this is how it actually spread, does that mean that it accurately captures the spirit of what Jesus is was teaching? And the closer you get to the theological center of that teaching, the closer you'll get to the way that Christianity spread in the past. I think
I
that's
mean,
necessarily true.
well, again, it depends. The problem is that there's self-serving myths on both sides here, right? There are
Of
a lot of
course,
people.
right.
There's a lot of people out there who want to argue that there was this beautiful Greco-Roman civilization that was destroyed by you know Semitic Christian civilization with a completely contrary set of values. The people who push this are really likely. In the UK, there's Alice Roberts. She just wrote a book called Dominion, I think it is, which is a deliberate takedown of Tom Holland's. Oh, sorry, it's called Domination. It's a deliberate takedown of Tom Holland's book Dominion that doesn't
Man.
mention it by name, which I think is hilarious. I haven't read it because I know it's going to be completely worthless. I've read some
Yeah.
excerpts. It's like this is somebody who clearly A doesn't know what they're talking about and B has an axe to grind, which is never a good
Yeah.
combination in academic work.
Well,
Um,
this is why I was, and I've been waiting to talk to you about Greg Nage, and I'm particularly curious about your take on that because to me, Greg Nage, getting through Greg Nage was the moment I realized Christianity is not. I mean, yes, it's based on like a Jewish mythic foundation in the way that Mormonism is based on Christianity, but it has a profound Hellenic heroic
I mean,
component
I
to
mean,
it.
my view on
That,
this is that there's no such thing as a non-Hellenic Judaism before the Masoretes. So, and I'm sympathetic too, although I certainly wouldn't ever state that this was necessarily the truth, because it does theoretically contradict probably what some people in the church hierarchy would say about it. But I think that Russell Merkin's arguments for a very late authorship of the Old Testament are strongly supported, and Merkin, who himself is Jewish, at least ethnically, specifically puts that late origin as we can see all these places where this text was influenced by Plato, therefore this text must come after Plato. And there's also some circumstantial evidence, like Herodotus, for instance, who travels all over the Near East, the Middle East, probably gets as far south as Egypt, I think it is, and as far east as India. And he is all about telling you about people with strange customs. Ah, the Agathrisai, they don't have marriage, but they all have sex in common. And the Ethiopians eat elephant trunks. Like, if he sees a culture with a weird custom, he will tell you about it. And he travels all the way through Palestine multiple times, and he never mentions a people group called the Jews. And Hebrew, Ibiru, is like I think it's ancient Egyptian for like raider or brigand or something like that.
huh.
So yeah, the idea being that the way that I characterize Merkin's idea, and like a lot of people are pining about these kind of academic works on the internet. Oh boy, I'm sure leaning on Merkin a lot. Maybe I should read him at some point. Um,
Well,
but my understanding of the skeleton of his argument is this is a text that follows like it's a text that we only have in its entirety in Greek at the beginning. We later
the
end up with
Septuagint. Yeah.
yeah. We end up with Hebrew copies of it later, and the traditional understanding of the Septuagint is that this is a translation from if you're
Aramaic or
stupid,
something.
Hebrew to Greek, and if you're more aware, then Aramaic and Hebrew, or possibly just Aramaic to Greek, right? Probably,
Aramaic makes more sense.
yeah. Probably in the 300s, Hebrew was already exclusively a liturgical language, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's no certainly we have texts from a little bit later that
Yeah.
are in Hebrew, right?
Well,
So I was being a bit
in
flippant when I said
either case, whether Judaism was sort of surprised and upended by this weird kind of Hellenic Christ figure, or whether Judaism was already primarily Hellenic. Either version makes the claim that, oh, Greece and Rome were taken over by this foreign spirit of Semitic religion. Like
Yeah,
that doesn't
but
make sense either way.
yeah, there's also an interesting thing that a lot of people who are trying to make political hay out of this point will be positively disposed towards Mithraism, and it's like, well, Mithraism is from further away than Palestine, right? It's that
Mm.
this is an Iranic cult, right? But they're okay with an Iranic cult because they, having never met either an Arab or a Jew or a Persian, they imagine that because Persian is an Indo-European language, Persia is somehow less Middle Eastern than Palestine is, which is a little bit absurd actually, because Persia is actually in the Middle East and Palestine isn't. Palestine's in the Near East. This is one of my real
Yeah. Well,
bugbears. It's like, please use the correct languages for geographic regions.
Jack is like getting into Mithraism, but not because of geographic racist reasons, but because like no, the story is cool.
Oh
Um
yeah,
I
but then you've got to deal with the fact that we don't even know what the Mithra. I've been to a Mithraeum. I've been to a Mithraeum
oh cool.
on Hadrian's Wall. I think I mentioned a little while back.
Yeah.
I was challenge hiking that with a buddy. I can send you the YouTube video if you want. He vlogged
Fuck
it. We
yeah.
got rained out. They had to shut the trail at the end. Um,
Yeah.
but there's also a really well preserved Mithraeum in London. They were
Yeah.
they were trying to excavate an office building, and they found like this fully preserved Mithraeum in the bottom, and they were like, "Oh, well, the law says that we have to preserve this," and they're like, "Maybe we could turn it to a tourist attraction." Um, so I've heard that
That's
one is kind of less good, and that you should just go to the one on Hadrian's Wall, and it's like properly ruined and wearing away. Um, but yeah, like so the we don't actually know very much about Mithraism. We know a lot more about this figure called Mithras, right? And so there's this assumption that they both have the same name, right? But I
yeah.
mean, given that they didn't leave us any text behind, like, can you imagine if in 1,000 years' time there was like a lively academic debate about what Mormons believed, because we don't really have much preserved from them. But we know that there were a kind of Christianity, and we know that they certainly consider themselves to be Christian. So yeah, as far as we can tell, Mormonism was just like a local variant of Christianity that developed. We don't think they had any distinctive practices, right? Um,
Yeah. Well,
it's
it's
like, because how would you know
right.
unless you'd seen the
You
Mormon
have
temple
to
ceremony
you
and you
have to
realized it
sort
was.
of assume based on the story, and we know that religions never map on one to one on the story, but you can still appreciate the story, and that's what makes some of the guys in the Order of Fire, for example, are really into the Indic stuff, but not the modern stuff. Like modern Hinduism is, I mean, it's hard to describe it even as one thing in general,
Oh
but
yeah, I
it's
know quite a lot about
super
Hinduism.
like autistic and OCD in like every bad thing you could say about priestly castes in general. Their
Yeah,
obsession with cleanliness and their numerology and their just weird
yeah.
shit. Hinduism is all of that. But
Which
if you
makes it
read,
kind of funny that Nietzsche is so kind of tries to use. You get this a lot. Like a lot of the people, people like Nietzsche, some modern neo-pagans, Reconstructionist neo-pagans in particular, really want to use this idea of a ancient, pure Indo-European religion that had everything that I like and nothing that I don't like in it. Um, but
well,
and then they are
yeah.
hamstrung by the fact that the only real surviving traditions from that are radically offensive to them in one or two ways. Because you've got either Zoroastrianism, which a lot of them will see as uh, it's the Imperium Press guys have this, right? Where they see that as like the first axial age religion. That's when the rot started setting in, when people started thinking about morality and thinking that you could reason your way into having a particular moral opinion.
Mhm.
Which I've always seen as a punt. It's like you should follow the ancestral principle, and you should just do whatever your oldest ancestors do, and that means that you should be a Reconstructionist Germanic neo-pagan. It's like,
Right.
okay, but you still decided to do that, right? You
Yes.
deciding to follow the ancestral principle is just like me deciding to take up my cross and follow my master, right? Like
It
at the
is,
end of the
yeah.
day, you cannot abdicate the
Choice.
necessity of choosing. And it's the
Exactly.
same with moral
100%.
decisions, right? Choosing not to do something is also a choice. You know, there's people I don't want to get involved, right? And this is, I mean, like, I don't want
Yes.
to bait myself into getting Peter Singer trapped here, but like, you know, not donating to charity is a choice just as much as donating to charity is a choice, right?
Right,
Like,
of course.
yeah, Rick,
Peter Singer
like,
trapped. I like that verb.
yeah. Well,
I know
it
what you
always
mean. Yeah.
kind of frustrates me that in an electoral context, right, you can vote yay, you can vote nay, or you can abstain. It's like, what is this abstain? Like, numerically, it's different, right? If I abstain, what I'm doing is I'm voting for the majority less hard than I would have voted if I just voted with the majority. But
Well,
that's
it's also
effectively
a
what you're doing.
it's also a market signal, and this is where like the mathematics behind like the prisoner's dilemma, if you look at it from a purely mathematical rational perspective, it never makes sense to stay loyal.
Yeah.
You should always give in and betray your partner.
And that's
uh
why every single honor
right,
culture like socializes people to think that's the worst thing you could possibly do. Nobody
right,
would ever associate with you if you did that
but
because you have to impose those costs
yeah,
outside
but as
the
soon
game.
as you work in second order consequences and like second and third order and fourth order effects, the idea of analyzing something as rational or irrational based on immediate first order consequences becomes retarded. And I think in the same way, there is a logic and a reasonability to abstention in what it signals in a longer term view
Yeah,
beyond
yeah.
just the short term. It's like it doesn't make sense or whatever.
I just don't like lukewarm people. It's like if you
Oh, for
disagree
sure.
with the
Well,
motion, vote against it. If you agree with the
but
motion,
the
vote for it.
I think this is not true of everyone who abstains, but I think many of the people who abstain are some of the least lukewarm people. They're the most radical. They're often, not always, not even maybe most of the time, but often enough, the people who say neither of these candidates is good enough for me. I am abstaining because I will not support Kamala Harris, but Trump is not far enough in
In a
whatever.
UK concept, we have this thing called whipping in the Parliament. So there's different levels of whip, and so what will often happen is that the party will decide that it's going to do something. There'll be somebody within the party who disagrees with that thing that the party has decided to do, and then the whips, the people who do the whipping, who make sure that everybody turns up to vote the way that they're supposed to for the party's sake, will calculate that a certain number of people are allowed to abstain and a certain in order that this legislation can still pass, but they can tell themselves they had nothing to do with it, right? And I've always just thought like, just quit the party, you coward.
Yeah,
But yeah, so to bring it back to the priest caste thing, right? Like
yeah.
the only surviving Indo-European religions that you could use as a basis for the original Indo-European religion in the modern day have really significant problems, and they are like the problems with Hinduism you've already described, and then Zoroastrianism is seen by a lot of
Yeah.
people as
But the
as
point I
the
would make,
origin of things going bad. It's like a
right?
proto-Christianity, right?
I think there is an argument to be made that these problems are not in the religion themselves per se, because if you look at the Rig Veda, it's a very different religious tone. It's very high test. It's
Oh
very like
yeah, yeah.
powerful stuff. And then you read the like the Mahabharata, and it's already getting like a little bit more, for lack of a better phrase, Buddhist. It's not the right word, but it's like definitely there's a shift in
So
tone, and then
so
you get to
I
modern Buddhism, and I think the problem is not with Hinduism or with some Proto-Indo-European root religion or anything, or even with Christianity. Although not all stories are equal in what they emphasize, obviously, but I do think there is a Nietzschean point here that's valuable, which is whenever you end up with a priestly caste or class of some sort that comes to dominate a culture, there is a trajectory of the values of the priestly caste as a caste or class apart from the religious details. And it is toward a very good lecture by Stanford behavioral biologist Robert Sapolsky on the relationship between schizotypal personality, but also obsessive compulsive disorder and priestly classes in general, not of any one religion, but
yeah, no,
um,
I agree with this. I'm just gonna
mhm,
interesting reverso here, right? Okay, so the religions with the priestly class, right,
mhm.
in this
Like
telling are going to be more effeminate, more liberal, more so if we could find a religion where the priestly class had real power, right, real teeth and the ability to direct society, we'd expect that group of people to be more dominated by priestly values, less martial, more feminine, more consensus based, more group culture right? And then if we were to get another group of people uh, where the priestly castes were less powerful. Let's say that there is no priesthood, right? Anybody can fulfill the role of a priest whenever they want, right? Like there is
Yeah.
no formal priesthood. It's all based on what you felt like doing today,
I mean,
right?
there's other mitigating factors beyond the
No, no, no.
priestly thing,
I think you
but
can see
I
the
point
direction I'm
taken.
going with
Yes.
this, and
Yeah.
let's to make this experiment even stronger. Let's make them both part of the same religious tradition, right? So the founder of the religion is the same, right? The core beliefs of the religion are the same, and so this is why, of course, right? We're going to find that Catholic and Orthodox countries are stereotypically much more effeminate and less manly, and have far fewer traditional values than Protestant countries with a priesthood of all believers, right? And
No,
actually,
I would
no,
think
it's
the
the
other way
opposite way
around.
round.
It,
So,
it,
which is, and what
well,
I'm saying is,
I don't. I don't know that the priest class dominates in the same way because I don't think you could get a better example of the domination by the priestly class culture than not just Protestants but Puritans specifically in the United
I agreed,
States.
agreed. I get
Unbelievably autistic
the rescue.
OCD.
I guess the rescue of this would be that I'm saying this is
Yeah.
a priesthood of all believers, and I for this argument, I'm saying it was the all believers part, so therefore we can see that,
I,
and they would say, no, no, it's everybody in society is now a priest,
so
right?
the interesting thing about Catholicism, and you know a lot more about Orthodoxy than I do, of course, but Orthodoxy might actually be an exception because I think in Orthodoxy priests can marry and have children, can't they?
Yeah, so to be fair though, in Catholicism there are significant elements of Catholicism with married priests. It's just the
Oh,
Latin rite that doesn't allow married priests. But for
okay.
instance, if you're married and convert to Catholicism and become a priest through, for instance, the Anglican Ordinariate, you can remain married. In Orthodoxy, you can be married and be a priest by tradition. Bishops have to be monastics.
Hmm.
So the senior ranks of the church are celibate, but that is not the historical practice. Saint Peter,
Okay.
for instance, had a wife and children,
Okay.
which is one of the
That's big.
Orthodox polemics against the Catholics is, you're deriving all of this all of this claimed religious, ecclesiastical, and kind of temporal, historically, not so much today, power on the basis that Peter was just extra special, and you've inherited a special charism that was given to him and not anybody else. Check the Greek plurals in the giving of the keys is the only thing that I'm going to say there. Uh, but you know, and yet you are insisting that your clergy are holier than Peter himself was. Because this is the other thing, like it's something that frustrates me a little bit
Strong
about
rhetoric.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's something that frustrates me a little bit about Christianity. Um, in my own tradition, in a lot of the other high church traditions, is a lot of people read some of the stuff that Paul says as it necessarily being the case that uh living in celibacy is a higher form of life. And you get Catholics who will say this. They're like, celibacy is the best, but for everybody who can't manage celibacy, there's married life. It's like that's not what the text says, right?
But
The
it
text
does
says that
seem to be what Peter says,
uh,
or
no, no, no,
Paul.
no.
Paul. I'm sorry, Paul. This is
Paul, Paul,
what Paul says.
Paul, Paul says that he wishes that other people could be like him, i.e.,
Yes.
celibate itinerant preachers. I think he's specifically saying it'd be really
Ooh,
helpful to have
itinerant.
more itinerant preachers, and
I wish you could all
and
be
if you're going
doing
to
the
be in
work
an
I'm doing. I see.
yeah, and
That's
if
an
you're going to
interesting
be an
interpretation.
itinerant preacher, you should probably be celibate, right? Because you can't do some of the things that the apostles did. Although, again, Saint Peter had a wife and kids, right? Some of the apostles did have children.
Yeah.
I think Peter's just saying, sorry, Paul is just saying, I've been this really effective evangelist, and one of the reasons I've been so effective is that I don't have a family tying me down,
Well,
sort of
he
okay, and I'm
does.
a Roman citizen, I can go where I like.
I mean, you could interpret it that way, but he is specifically talking about marriage, and he does say in the same speech that he says it's better for people to be married rather than to burn with passion.
Yeah.
So
My
it's not
understanding
completely
is the
incorrect.
standard Protestant read of that is like some people are blessed with effectively asexuality, and those people should be celibate, but
Yeah.
everybody else should probably get married. And I think that
Oh, is
I
that the
think
meaning of Jesus's?
some are
Uh,
made eunuchs for the
yeah.
sake of the kingdom. Yeah. People dispute that. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff in the Old
Yeah.
Testament. But yeah, I'm kind of instinctively opposed to these sort of priestly values, and I think
That's healthy.
Yeah, yeah, I don't want to be a
Well,
priest,
and
right?
Robert Sapolsky, I mean, in his examples, he lists the Hindu Brahmins as an example. He lists Jewish rabbis as or Orthodox rabbis as an example, and he lists Martin Luther in particular as a distillation of someone not just with these priestly tendencies, but with clinically diagnosable OCDs. He has a line where he says, "The more I clean myself, the dirtier I get." You can't get
That's
more
yeah, yeah.
OCD than that.
Well, that's
Um,
kind of interesting actually because far from being kind of the exemplar of the priestly type, the anti-Luther polemic from the Catholic side is that this is a guy who failed at being a monk and couldn't get a hold of his own lusts.
oh, interesting.
Certainly we know for a fact that he preached that monasticism was like bad, wrong, evil, right? Lutheranism
Hmm.
doesn't have a monastic tradition, um, quite deliberately, and most basically all Protestants, with the exception of Anglicans, who are arguably not really Protestant, are opposed to monasticism. And
Perhaps.
he married a former nun. Um,
But Luther still represents a rebellion of higher purity against a corrupt institution. And it's
yeah, I
it's still
guess.
a the trajectory is a tendency towards
Yeah.
greater priestly purity, even if the Catholic Church says, "Well, you weren't that great yourself," and he's like, "I am literally OCD levels of aware of that," um, and the Puritans
Well,
turn that up to
I think
11.
the thing is that the Catholic narrative, sorry, the all the stuff that Luther did can be woven into this narrative that it's all very, very self-serving. So, for
Mhm.
instance, the Catholics will say he threw out books of the Bible he didn't like, which is kind of true. There was an acknowledgement that the Apocrypha were kind of like a lower grade of scripture. What made up Apocrypha was disputed, but it is very convenient that all the stuff that he threw out helped his own political point. So, like, he says, "Oh, you can't pray for the dead. Oh, let's throw out Maccabees where they do that." Right, it is a famous example. But also stuff that he couldn't throw out because it had too much authority. He really didn't like, so he didn't want to put the Epistle of James in his Bible because it explicitly says that you have to do good works,
Yes,
and that didn't fit with his theology.
right.
Right, so
And this is where
that
like I think there is a difference between a lay approach to religion as generally practiced as we see not just in um like ancient Hinduism like prior to it getting all like weird and
oh god, we're
priestly.
back on the
Um
Indo-Europeans. This is good.
yeah, yeah, but like you see it in the Old Testament too, and I would love to make a couple reels in the future enjoining non-Christians to read specifically the books of Job and Ecclesiastes as literature because they're
We were talking about the
phenomenal.
Septuagint earlier. We were talking about the Septuagint
Yes.
earlier. You know, Septuagint Job is a completely different book.
No, I did not know that.
So the Job that you're probably familiar with is the edited, re like mashed up version of the Masoretic text, most likely.
Okay.
So Job is described as being a super wealthy man, right?
Right.
Job is the same Joabab from Exodus. He's a king. He's a non-Jewish king who is explicitly described as being blessed by God at the exact time that the Israelites are in captivity in Egypt. I was trying to think of what are the other like significant changes. There's a very famous passage where Job's wife says, "Curse God and die."
Yes.
Right? Nope.
I'm
No,
I'm
she doesn't. No, she doesn't.
okay.
She says that in the Masoretic. She doesn't say it in the Septuagint.
Interesting.
Um, yeah. It's in the Septuagint is generally the general pattern is that the Septuagint tends to read more Christian. Now you could argue that's just because the origin language of Christianity is Greek, and so the Greek Old Testament, obviously there's commonalities there. My argument obviously would be no, this is the old text before it was edited by a group of people with an axe to grind, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
Job is very different. Esther is completely different. Like
Hmm.
we were talking about Luther. Luther has writings where he's quite negative about Esther. He's like, why is this in scripture? Like the word God isn't mentioned once in this story, right? It's a weird revenge fantasy about like you're familiar with the story of Purim, I assume, so I don't need to belabor the point. Um, it's like you were going to do a genocide on us, but we reverse unoed you and we genocided you instead. It's very, very bleak, right?
Yeah,
In the Septuagint, it's a very different book again. Um,
interesting.
but yeah, but yes, Job, yes, Ecclesiastes, um, that's wi wisdom literature, which I'm less familiar with than I should be, but I do like Job.
Ecclesiastes is one of my favorite books, and it's a book I profoundly misunderstood for a long time. Um, what's interesting is that it's kind of a philosophical meditation on the value of life without God. And there's this euphemistic phrase that is used under the sun, which is under the sun means just in the world without God, just
Okay.
in a purely natural world. And the conclusion of the writer of the king or the preacher is everything is vanity and pointless, and you should basically just enjoy the good of your work and enjoy the good things in life and basically look forward to death. Um, and
I
it's
have
it's
seen
also
a
this there's this famous line from Ecclesiastes that people will often quote as positive, where they say, "To everything there is a purpose. There's a time and purpose for everything under heaven. A time to
yeah,
be born, and a time to die,
yeah,
time
I'm
to
familiar with the
all
passage.
this
Yeah.
very, very beautiful poetry." That is not the message. That is the message of what it would be like without God, which the context of the setting of the whole book changes the meaning of Ecclesiastes 3, which is that this famous line which got turned into a song by the Birds in like the 1970s or whatever. Um,
I have seen there's this uh so there's an academic, I think he was a Jewish academic, and he was talking about like the early religious idea. He's doing kind of doing the axial age thing, but he's putting Judaism in as a non-axial age religion, which is kind of a novelty. Whereas a lot of axial age people are like, "Oh, the axial age comes with Judaism," and he's saying, "No, no, the axial age actually comes with Zoroastrianism, and it bleeds into Judaism, and that's where you get Christianity from." And he's trying to make this comparison with like the uh, Old Testament idea of Sheol and the Greek idea of hell. He's like, see, all people thought that death was like a specifically bad thing, and like being alive was great.
have you met the Egyptians? Like, what are you
Yeah, yeah.
talking about?
Well,
Have you met the Norse?
he's trying to make this common like Mediterranean idea, and I think I've talked to you a little
Okay.
bit about how even prior to Christianity there were like multiple ideas of the afterlife in Greek tradition, and it was
Mhm.
yeah, I was really nerding out about Lin-Manuel Miranda's blog and his analysis of Etruscan so he's making this point that so we hear about like hell, right? It's where Achilles goes and he says that he wishes that he could be living and a slave because that would be better than this grim existence, like waiting for people to sacrifice to him, right?
Right.
But then you've also got this idea of the Elysian Fields and Rhadamanthus, the guardian of the Elysian Fields, who, where you'll die and you'll go to a place where it's just endless grain and corn as far as you can see, and everything's
Yeah.
beautiful and the sun's
Greg
always
Norris
shining.
talks about the island of the blessed.
Exactly, yeah.
Um, mm.
Yeah, and so the idea, which I had only heard for the first time in this Lin-Manuel Miranda piece, I think it does predate him, but he points out that Rhadamanthus has the NTH combination of consonants, which we know or strongly suspect is a pre-Indo-European. It's the Pelasgian word, so you get it in Corinth, you get it in Labyrinth, right, and you get it in Rhadamanthus, which indicates this is a pre-Greek word. And so they're saying, okay,
Mm.
the Indo-European idea of the realm of the dead is Hades, and the Pelasgian, Etruscan, pre-Indo-European idea of the realm of the dead is the Elysian Fields, and that's why the Greeks believe in both in different times in different places because
Okay.
they've imported one, which I
Because
thought was kind of cool.
what
Um,
what we see in the classical age Greece, I don't know if this is Homer or like the Trojan War era, but in at least in classical Athens with Socrates and Plato, we have very strong ideas of the immortality of the soul, and Socrates saying, I am quite certain that death is not necessarily a bad thing, or I don't know if death is a good
yeah,
thing or a
yeah,
bad thing. And he seems quite sold on the idea of the immortality of the soul, and this is based on Homer. The inferences he's trying, and I'll use this as a segue in the last few minutes we have to this book, which I think you might enjoy a lot. It's super good. It's
He gets
about
points for calling it
um
mythos instead of mythos already.
right, but it's the quality is up there with Naj, I think.
Oh wow,
Um,
okay, that's a high
but
recommendation from you.
but it's dense. It's denser
Yeah,
than Naj. Like you're complaining about Naj being repetitious, and he is. And it makes reading Naj a little bit easier. I can't read more than a page of this if my kids are around because I have to focus. Um,
yeah,
but he's talking about the words and how Alethea is bound by DK and
yeah.
Moira and all these
You
things. And
posted an excerpt
um,
on your story recently.
right, and he's it's a collection of essays, so it's not one guy. Wiens is just the editor, but there's an essay about the kinds of Greek knowledge,
Is
things
this
that you
like
saw versus things.
episteme and
No, it's
uh
before that. He's talking about the linguistic roots for the words that were used to mean uh know or convey eventually builds up to concepts of episteme that we get later, but the
episteme versus techne? I think I'm
that's like understanding.
yeah, yeah.
We're talking about like I know because I saw. I forget what was the Greek word
Okay.
used for
I,
this.
I I think I
Oida.
might have said this in one of our
Yeah.
earlier videos, but one of my favorite ways to talk about this, and I end up having to talk about this kind of thing quite a lot in my day job, uh, and I've used this example at work before. It's like, well, who knows more about sex, right? A prostitute or a virgin gynecologist? And the answer, of course, is well, they both know about, they're both experts in sex in different ways, right? It's like,
Right.
yeah, choose your audience before using that one at work, but it gets the point across very quickly. You can you
Yeah.
can be pettifogging about talking about like, oh, the hands-on experience of skin in the game,
Yeah.
or you can just say that
You
and
do the
everybody
same
immediately
thing
knows
with
what you
like
mean.
a surgeon or a Navy SEAL in regards to death or whatever.
Or
Um,
getting shot, I think would pro
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, who knows more about gunshot wounds, right? Like, yeah, the Navy SEAL. Yeah, okay. I think that the crudity of my simile actually helps drive it home into people's head, though.
I bring that up because I made the mistake of I was making this argument about the socially constructed nature of the phrase rape, right? Like rape is basically like people say appeal to rape as an example of a universally objectively bad category. I was like,
Yeah,
well, if a 19-year-old has sex with a 16-year-old, is that rape? Well, in some places it is, in other places it isn't.
yeah,
And there are commonalities in what all cultures consider to be rape. Um, but that commonality stems from basically both cultures saying this is sex we have declared to be
yeah.
illegal or
Well,
morally wrong.
yeah,
So rape, so
in as much as different cultures declare the same acts to be illegal, there's a biological basis for that, right? Like
yeah,
things that every culture will consider to be rape, right?
but even the
Things that
biology has
undermine
a
paternal certainty.
yeah, but even the biology has a limitation if you move outside the human species to things like black widows, or if you want to get really spicy, Tasmanian devils. Where
When you said widows there, I thought you were going to start talking about the
oh,
phenomenon of taking the pussy. Uh, but again, yeah,
yeah,
in different cultures draw the line in
yeah,
different places,
but
right?
I ran into this problem of whenever I tried to bring this up, and it's just a linguistic point. It's just a like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
like
yeah.
you can't appeal to the objectivity of rape as proof of an objective source of morality because it's just a legal category we arrived at afterwards,
If you want a
and
different
it
example
triggers
of the
so many
exact same
people.
thing,
So I just do murder. I just do murder because it's
well,
like, yeah,
I was gonna say if you want
self-defense
to do the same
murder.
thing, do mur no, no, you don't even need to do self-defense murder because there are anti-death penalty people who will say I don't think the state should be murdering people, which is presupposing their conclusion.
Yeah, or
I think it's
just say
wrong that the
killing.
state is wrongfully.
Yeah,
Yeah, but like they'll
yeah,
specifically be arguing against the death penalty, and they'll say it's wrong because the state shouldn't be murdering people, which is presupposing their conclusion.
yeah, yeah.
Because
That's just
I think you and I,
coffee. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I think that in most modern Western societies, wealthy Western societies, it's probably as a matter of prudence not a good idea to have a death penalty, right? Like at the end of the day, you can afford to lock people up for life. That means that if you fuck up, you can let them go. That
Yeah.
means that you don't have to deal with. Because my understanding is at the moment, in the US, it actually costs more to execute somebody than it does to incarcerate them for the rest of their
Well,
natural life
whose fault
because
is
of
that?
yeah, yeah, but those people aren't just going to go away. If you get the policy, you can get the policy you want. You can't get the policy you want and have everybody agree with you, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that if you have a death penalty as a society, people are going to be opposed to it. They're going to gum up the works as much as they can,
Yeah.
and they're going to make it very expensive to educate people. It's baked into the cake. That being the case, it's probably easier to just let them take the W on this one, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so we recently had
I
a
consider myself a capital punishment agnostic or ambivalent. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I would, if it were up to me, I would lean towards supporting the death penalty, but
yeah,
I don't feel
my
strongly enough
one.
about it.
I'm a supporter of it in principle. I'm not sure I would want it for my current society in practice, but in different circumstances, I would want it for my society. Like
Yeah.
for instance, if we were a little bit poorer. Or the one thing that really does frustrate me though is there's kind of a beautiful thing, and I think it's a post-Christian thing of this idea of prison for rehabilitation. That really, like most societies, do not have this, which is why most societies don't really have prison, right? You have execution, you have jails, which is where you put people while you're waiting to execute them. And if you don't execute them, you'll either torture them or mutilate them, right? You're
Right.
doing something cheap because you don't think it's actually possible to reform someone's character. In primarily post-Western society, basically the whole world over now, though, there's this idea of rehabilitation. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's completely undermined. In the UK, we have, in the US, you stack life sentences on top of each other, make it impossible for people to be released. In the UK,
Yeah.
we have a thing called a whole life order, which is so a life sentence in UK law. A lot of the tabloid media will complain about this. A life sentence does not mean that you spend the rest of your life in prison, right? And a lot of people think that it means that, and they get pissed off. What a life sentence means is that you are always and forever under the eye of the state and never again a truly free person. But
Yeah.
you could have a life sentence and be judged by the judicial system. I'm not saying they always make this judgment correctly, but you can be
Mhm.
judged that actually you're at such a low risk of reoffending that we're going to permit you to serve the remainder of your sentence in the community. And also, you don't have any work requirements, right, etc. So you're going to live a pretty normal life, apart from the fact that the police can come into your house whenever they want to. You have a set of release conditions that you have to follow, and if you fail to follow them, you go back to prison. It's basically like being on parole for your entire life, right? That's the way it works
Yeah.
in this country, right? If you've done something really egregious, though, a judge will impose what's called a whole life order, which is an order that you have to spend the whole of your sentence in prison. And to me, I feel like, how can you be in favor of the existence of whole life orders and not in favor of the death penalty, right? Uh, if you give somebody a life
Well,
sentence,
I think
part of
that
the argument for that is
the
is
justification is the what if we fucked up? And what if we get exonerating DNA
yeah.
evidence or
Well,
something like that?
but I think more than that, I think the argument is, well, what if this person is redeemable, right?
Yeah.
And for most things that people get a life sentence for, like I think the vast majority, like this is gonna sound really ridiculous and make me sound like a screamy shitlib, but like the majority of murderers only kill one guy, right?
Yeah.
So like, is you can do the life for a life thing, right? Or you can say, you know what, if this guy killed a guy, spends 20 years in prison, gets released from prison as an old man, and is allowed to go and like work part
Yeah.
time in the bike shop while checking in with his parole officer every month, right?
Well,
Is that better or worse than him spending his whole life in prison just because prison is nastier? You know?
right. Yeah. Well, just to bring it back to Homer for funsies in the last few minutes here, because I have to go here in a second. But you said
I need to
this
go back to
seems like
bed,
a
so
post-Christian thing. Um, I think it's only post-Christian because of the Hellenic connection to Christianity that we're seeing. Because one of the great themes of Greek tragedy prior to Christianity is this idea of anagnorisis, or recognition, which is preceded by peripeteia, the reversal of fortune. And many of the stories that of people who in prison have their turnaround redemption arc, it's hitting rock bottom. It's that that peripatetic
yeah,
moment
I'm
and
always
the
super skeptical of this.
and
Yeah.
the anecdote, well, and it doesn't happen every time. It doesn't even happen
Yeah.
most of the time. The beauty of the idea that you're describing is the exception, but it is a real thing, and that's where Blackburn's law comes into case. Like, how many people would you be willing to let rot but not killed to let that one person with the capability have their anagnosis, have their tragic recognition? This is what Greek tragedy is all
Yeah, yeah,
about.
yeah.
Um, and to be redeemed by the understanding. And this is really what Aletheia was talking about. This essay I'm working on, I'm so far behind on this. I wonder if I can find the quote because it's so good. Um, he describes Aletheia as a what was the line with the unveiled veiling? Aletheia in poetry, Parmenides to refer to. Uh, I can't find the quote immediately, but he describes the experience of Aletheia as like uncovering something that was hidden doesn't necessarily describe it. Um, because there are
Well, that would be
examples in texts.
apocalyptos is to uncover something. That's why it's the apocalypse
Right.
is called Revelation, right?
Yeah. But the lethe, that is the root of lethe. Lethe
It's
has
the river,
a
isn't it?
of forgetfulness and
Yeah,
oblivion, and so alethe is like to be not forgotten. And it doesn't mean like remembering what you've always known in some kind of Platonic education way, but it means the unveiling of the unveiled to your eyes. And the example that came to my mind is like, suppose you misplaced your car keys, right? And they're literally on a countertop, but you're
yeah. But when you
searching
find
everywhere.
them, you remember putting them there.
Exactly, exactly. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like it's not necessarily that something was hidden from sight, but it was hidden from your notice.
There is
And
actually
noticing
for the,
something,
if there's a fact that you knew you won at some point, you knew at some point. Sorry, there
mm,
is a memory manipulation technique, which is stop trying to think of the answer and try and remember it. Like remember what you like, and it can sometimes jog people's memory such that they'll come up with it.
yeah, yeah. So there's a connotation to aletheia that is not just truth and not just what is uncovered, although it also means both of those things, but which is a sort of he's described as like the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But it's that clicking together of how things fit that was in front of you, but which you hadn't put together in your head. That and it fits together perfectly with the experience of anagnorisis that the tragic hero
Yeah,
encounters when they see, oh, this is how I brought this on myself. Got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And the
No, no, I
whole
get that.
Greek tragic formula seems a like a cryptic setup and priming for the criminal or whoever who has done something wrong to have that experience,
Yeah, yeah.
to
No,
have that
fair
moment.
enough. Yeah,
And
that's
and I
that's
think
quite interesting.
but to me this only supports the idea that Jesus is a culmination and refinement and perfection of the Greek tragic heroic
Yeah,
model, because he does take it to the next level. But I think the foundation was there in Greek, and again, this it sort of
yeah.
follows our
I,
theme of
I
Semitic incursion on Greek Roman tradition. Seem kind of silly. Um,
we were talking about Hinduism and how like
yes,
in your reading the Rig Veda is not super similar to modern day expressions of Hinduism,
right.
and I think you're correct when you say that there's no such thing as Hinduism as a religious practice. Like there is a big difference between like Advaita Vedanta versus like a Southern Indian like devotee of Jagannath versus a like Vaishnavite versus a Shaivite, but like which doesn't mean there aren't underlying metaphysical presuppositions.
Right.
And it's become very popular, and I think that there's some truth to this, but I don't think it's a coincidence that this idea became popular during the period of the British Empire, during the period of like the Western world's expansion and domination of the globe. That there was this kind of original pure Aryan religion that was then corrupted by mixing with the Dravidian people, right?
Right. Yes.
And it, I mean, I think that's fundamentally probably has something to do with what actually happened. And but a lot, and I mean a lot of Indians would take the opposite view to the point of being full-on conspiracy theorists. And I know this because I work with one, right? And so I was talking it was really interesting dynamic. It was myself, a colleague who was a Christian of Indian descent, and another colleague who is not only a Hindu of Indian descent, but as I was going to find out, a huge fan of Narendra Modi, right? And a believer in all the Hindutva stuff. And I'm obviously like one of the things I'm known for at work when I'm not fully revealing all my positions is that I like linguistics. I'm really into linguistics. So I'm talking to Solomon, who, if it wasn't obvious, is uh, the Christian guy in this conversation about linguistics. I said, oh, it's kind of cool because like all North Indian languages are descended from like this common ancestor in Ukraine, and this Modi appreciator is like, I don't think that's true, and I was like, I mean, of all the conclusions that you could reach in linguistics, the existence of Indo-European is one of the least controversial, and she's like, no, I don't think it's true. Like, actually,
It's like people
you,
who don't think IQ is true, but they're really into psychology.
yeah. No. But this is kind of a load-bearing part of the way these people think, because these Hindutva types, they will argue for what's called out of India, which is this discredited idea that the Indo-European people originated in India and spread out from there, and they will say, well, see Sanskrit is most Indo-European language. It's not. No, it's not. But I made the point that like why is Lithuanian so similar to Sanskrit? Because a lot of them have like these Hindutva types have a really weird fake history, and that basically her answer is that there used to be a globe-spanning Indian empire. During which India taught everybody on the planet how to be civilized, and any similarities between our languages and those languages is a result
Sounds
of
like the
us borrowing
brown,
loan words. And
it's like
yeah,
the
yeah, it's
brown
very much
version
we
of
would.
Black
It was it.
Hebrews,
Yeah, it's we was
Black
Kangs,
Israelites. Yeah.
but I would be interested to see what Akshay's position on this is, because kind of implicitly the whole project of taking Homer back to the steppe is super related to Indo-Europeanology, right? And
Yeah.
that's why my books around this were, you know, Drews and Anthony dueling banjos, right? Was because that kind of step origin is so important, and it's important in the books that you prescribe in your curriculum as well. But that kind of inherently means that we're connecting the the Greek text and the Greek classics to their Indo-European roots. And there's a couple of ways you can go from there. You can try and make them into a soup where you're like, and also the Rig Veda has Indo-European roots, right? And also Hinduism, and that's how you get a lot of pagan reconstructionists really like this, because they can point towards Hinduism. They can say, I'm going to take Hinduism, I'm going to strip out all the stuff I don't like, I'm going to call that the original religion, and say that you should, as a European, be doing Hinduism with this stuff stripped out, right? Which I think would be very, very alien to the actual Greek mind, especially the like
Yeah.
late imperial Greco-Roman mind, right? Which
Yeah.
which went in a completely different direction. And that's not to say that there weren't commonalities. There's a theory that Pyrrhonism was related to Buddhism, which I think is an interesting one to track. But like
Hmm.
the alternative is to not do that step connection. I'd just be really interested to see what Akshay
Yeah.
has to say on this, because I would the other thing, kind of unspoken assumption that we have, is that a lot of the kinds of people who are interested in rediscovering these sorts of texts, especially in a European or Euro-American context, tend to be on the right, right? Tend to be people who are interested in tradition, they're interested in martial virtue, they're interested in history, and a particular kind of history that's very unfashionable among modern kind of social history
Sort of
practitioners.
historical interest that someone who listens to a BAP podcast might take interest in.
Exactly. Like as opposed to the kind of, you know, the kind of historical interest of somebody who's really interested in the particular internal lived experience of weavers in 14th century Flanders, right? I'm not saying
Right.
that's without value. I'm just saying that like there are different ways to be into history, right?
Yeah.
And the way
Drews
that
is not the same as Jared Diamond.
yeah, exactly. And so that results in a certain kind of position on and way of viewing both these texts and the world. Like nobody in these groups likes Emily Wilson very much, right? And I'm pretty sure everybody in these groups is aware of the existence of an ancestral group of people who kind of brought these myths into Europe that they also are convinced are the people who conquered Persia and North India.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see in the context of if you were teaching this course to Indians, right, to a wider group of Indians, because the political fault lines and the cultural fault lines are not in the same place. So
Right.
a right wing Indian man who's a member of the majority who is likely to be into martial virtue, into strength, like into the glory of his own ancestors, is going to probably going to try and read the Iliad through a lens of Indocentrism, which I think would be quite interesting to come from. But also,
Yeah.
if I haven't made it obvious, I think that the Hindutva out of India Sanskrit theory is nonsense, right?
Well,
But
I would, my intuitive response would be, well, like to point to by comparison, what is the great epic poem of England?
Beowulf
Of course, where did Beowulf take place?
in Denmark. Yeah, yeah,
Not
yes, I
England.
agree.
And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like so anybody who is
This is Sweden, I think,
obsessing
actually.
anyone who is obsessing over where these things really happened and what sort of people really did it and so forth, um like as a primary interest for the spirit of the text are probably approaching it in the wrong spirit. And that doesn't
I,
mean that
I,
they aren't legitimate and very interesting anthropological and good questions. They are, and they might even have implications. But at the end of the day, like I am 0% Greek as far as I'm aware.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that does not stop me at all from profoundly enjoying and pardon the new age language, but resonating with these
I mean, you say
stories.
you're 0% Greek, but in the imaginarium of the kind of sophisticated online mythic right,
Mhm.
you are European, right?
Yeah.
And you're seeing this, and actually, I have this when I read biblical texts. It's like I'm often feeling very sympathetic towards the tribe of Dan or very sympathetic towards the Philistines because I'm aware that there's a sense in which they are my people and the people
Hmm.
who are the protagonists of the story are not.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we're all sons of Abraham by adoption, like ideologically,
Yeah.
right? Religiously, socioculturally, I think most Westerners are more similar to the ancient Israelites than they are to the Philistines specifically, right? But
This takes a deal of introspection to do correctly. But the question I would ask is like your feelings of sympathy for the tribe of Dan and the Philistines. Do those feelings come prior to or after an awareness of the ethnicity of those groups?
yeah, yeah, well, it's impossible because they're all tied up.
Yeah. Well, it's just my
And
thought is
it's
like
not.
if you approach it according to the theories of the people on the right, which I'm
Yeah,
kind of sympathetic to, but I have my questions too. According, if their theories are true, then you could race blind the descriptions of all the characters, cut out all descriptions of hair color, skin color,
yeah, yeah.
um,
Well, that's kind of
story,
interesting because
and
you'd be looking for the
you would still find there would still be affinities that would draw you to your people, right?
yeah,
What
yeah.
happens if you're not?
Yeah, I think that one would be quite interesting because if you were to take like a race realist and change all the names and places, you'd be like, oh, I really like this guy. He's got red hair and blue eyes. That's King David.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
and
point I'm
maybe
making
he's still
is
cool, and
yeah
like
the
there's a
point
great. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think the point I'm making is a bit more general than that in that like it's possible to imagine a world where the people who are into this group are not like also super into weightlifting and super into like martial stuff
Oh,
and
sure,
like don't all have fairly right wing politics. And I think that the what I'm saying is the kind of person who like I think the kind of person who's interested in the topics that we're discussing is more likely to vote Trump than whoever is opposed to Trump, right?
very
And
probably.
I think in India they're more likely to vote for Modi than they are to vote for whoever Congress puts up this time,
Sure.
right?
My,
Yeah.
my brief exposure to Indian Twitter is that
Oh God, it's
it's
dire.
very it's supposedly like I don't have much exposure and it's all indirect. But it's that they all have very strong opinions, and they don't agree with each other. They all there are different subgroups, and the god of this one group is the demon of this other group,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like current.
I
They're
mean,
currently
I think
having.
that could be. I think that could be like that could be any group of people though. But another thing that I'll
Yeah.
say before I guess before we sign off is you were saying, is it really relevant the origin of these people? Are you familiar with a creator called Tom Rousel?
Oh yes, of course,
Yes.
of
Yeah,
course.
really great guy, great guy.
Yeah, yeah.
We
I don't
move in
mean
some of the
it's
same
not.
circles IRL in the UK. The
Oh, cool.
reason I the reason I
Mm.
bring him up is that his response and to be fair, I don't think that the position espoused in these papers is correct, but there is a minority position in Indo-European studies that says actually, the steppe origin of the Indo-Europeans is probably not correct. Probably they originated in Mesopotamia, moved up through the Caucasus, and then settled the steppe, right? And
Maybe.
so, yeah, for you, it doesn't make a difference for a certain group of people who are typified by Tom Rousel, they argue against this very, very vociferously. Now, I think they argue against it correctly because I think that the position is wrong, right? But I definitely think that there's an element of, stop trying to bring our pure Hyperboreans down into the muck and mess of Mesopotamia, right? No, no, like we're our own thing. We're separate from them. We're not connected to them, right? And I think that that impulse comes from imputing a certain set of beliefs about your ancestors. Like my ancestors can't possibly have come from the Middle East, right? Because I associate the Middle East with backwardness and dirtiness and rubbishness, right? My ancestors came from the pure north, right? They hunted the
Like,
bison and then they
what's a
invented doing war.
pure European from
Exactly.
2150? Imagine a pure blonde-haired, blue-eyed European of pure Anglo-Saxon descent in the year 2150, and he's arguing with a friend of
What in the
his.
future, right?
Yes, in the future, and he finds out his ancestors came from
Poland.
Rhodesia. They
Yeah,
came
yeah.
from
Oh, Rhodesia.
Africa. They came from
Yeah.
Africa. Or does the fact that the Europeans were at some point in Africa, does that it
Yeah,
doesn't
I,
fucking
I
matter?
agree. But all these kinds of questions are
Yeah.
kind of silly. But I don't think that we can dodge like why are we interested in the Indo-Europeans as a group of people, right? Like you and me, right? I don't think it's just specifically because of cool things about them. I think it's because
No,
we think that knowing
no,
about them is going to
it
tell
does
tell
matter.
us
Well,
things
and
about
it's
ourselves.
there is power in old ideas. It's fun to I feel like there's power in knowing the root meanings of words, things like truth,
Yeah.
aletheia. Um, but it's also I feel like the further back you
I
go,
think I think the
there's a
etymology
feeling
in
there's a
European language in English, I think that it's actually more related to oath, like because you can plight your troth, right? I think truth and troth are the same. And the oh this is really gonna set off some red flags, but the SS motto, "Meine Ehre ist Treue," which I'm pronouncing wrong, right? My honor is loyalty. So the word
hmm.
true means loyalty in German, right? And troth in English is swearing an oath. So I don't think the
Oh, I thought
etymological.
true came from straight, like to true and arrow.
Yeah, they're synonymous, but
Oh,
but
okay.
but what I'm saying is that like I don't
Because
think.
that aligns with DK, as in like straightness
Okay.
is justice. But
Yeah.
that might be a independent similarity.
Yeah. All I'm saying is that like the etymology being the case um for aletheia helps you in the interpretation of Greek text specifically, but it doesn't tell you anything fundamental about the nature of truth and reality. And if you thought
Right.
that, you'd be doing the kind of word concept conflation that you're really critical of in stuff
Yes.
like. So what you're learning about is how a particular ancient group of people conceived of the idea of truth.
Well, right. And as you study these people in their language and in the anthropology and geology of it too, it feels as if you're stripping back layers of civilization to get to the root of what we are. And there
Uh,
are, of course, differences between different groups of people. And there are, if you,
I've found the AI which seems to have confirmed my position, I'm afraid. So the word truth, according to an AI summary of some search results, comes from the Old English word triuth, a noun formed from the adjective truer. Both words derive from the Proto-Germanic treui, meaning having good faith, which ultimately traces back to the Proto-Indo-European word deru or dru, meaning firm, solid, or steadfast.
Firm, solid, or steadfast. Is
Which is
straight?
a different idea from aletheia being revealing
Yes.
what. Yeah,
But is it different than DK in Greek?
I don't know, and I don't trust the multiple layers deep layer cake of AI queries.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, although I do think AI is actually pretty good with that kind of thing because the source
oh yeah,
material
there's
it's
some of the
drawing
search
from
history is
is,
pretty
is
decent.
pretty good.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, when I'm talking about truth, I'm talking about aletheia. Truth is the English translation of Greek text that we're drawing from.
yeah, yeah,
So aletheia is actually the root word that we're talking about with truth most of the time in a Christian context and classical Greek, so forth. The Greeks weren't writing in English. Um, but what was I going to say? Indo-Europeans stripping back layers, getting to some root part. I there are still like quite a bit of variations on the ways that people lived and how they thought, even 5, 6, 7, 10,000 years back. But it feels like there's I don't know, it feels like you can connect with a part of yourself that has been covered up, so to speak.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, I guess my closing statement, I guess. Well, so my opening statement was, yeah, actually, totally coincidentally, I've been reading Selective Reading and the Birth of Philosophy. But I think if you're into Homer, you should read Selective Reading and the Birth of Philosophy, right?
I agree.
Specifically because it will introduce you to Pindar, right? And I think the Pindar is good at getting people into the mindset. Um, and I wasn't familiar with any of the actual works of Pindar before, and I found them quite beautiful, even in translation. And it's the
Hmm.
first time I've really been tempted to actually learn a little bit of ancient Greek, so I could pass my way through some of these poems, which is not a feeling I had for the Iliad. You know, I'm an Iliad
Yeah.
fan. You're more of an Odyssey guy. It's not a feeling I had for either of those books. Although the Iliad specifically, when read, you know that guy, Nator Zhang, right?
He's
Like he does a really good performance.
amazing. Dude, I made a video. I will share it in the group
Yeah,
actually
but like
of his reading of the Odyssey.
the beauty of the actual what was it? Iambic heptameter, dactylic, the uh poetic scheme and meter that is used in these epic poems, which I want to
Dactylic
say is
hexameter, yeah.
sorry, dactylic
Dactylic
hexameter. Yeah,
hexameter. Mhm.
not iambic. Yeah, iambic's a different thing.
Iambic is Shakespearean sonnets.
Yeah, yeah, that's where I was getting mixed up. But yeah, so that sounds beautiful as a thing, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes it's cool to go to the original word in a text, but I didn't actually have the desire uh to actually interpret the poetry in the original prior to reading some of these Pindar translations, which I just thought were really good. And
Yeah.
like yeah. Um yeah, read Selective Breeding and the Birth of Philosophy is good. Read enough of Drew's until you get bored. I am now quite keen on reading The Coming of the Greeks, which actually probably would have been a better one to read than Militarism and the Indo-Europeanizing of Europe. But it makes the same kind of thesis. The
Nice.
I guess the modern understanding of the coming of the Indo-Europeans to Greece in particular, as distinct from what you'll get from like a Burckhardt type, like turn of the century German interpretation, is the understanding there were multiple waves of Indo-European settlement. So the Mycenaeans were themselves Indo-Europeans who then got their faces kicked in by another group of Indo-Europeans, and this happens all over the place. You see the same thing with like groups like the Mitanni in the Middle East. I think I said that I mainly come down on the uh, Drew's side of the debate as per chariot riding, etc. There's one case in which I don't, which he tries to set up as a reductio ad absurdum, where he points out that like the Hittites would have had to have come to the Middle East and then forgotten how to ride horses and then learned it again.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, they're all worth reading, and they'll all help you understand the kind of wider background, I
Nice.
guess.
I'll have to
Good
order
books.
those. I'll close on one literary anecdote that sums up how I feel about the whole the race question. And the like the origins. There's a book put out by Chuck Palahniuk, the Fight Club author,
Yeah.
called Adjustment Day, which is first of all fucking hilarious. Second of all, it's a brilliant setup. It's basically it was his attempt to deal with the alt-right, but he took it seriously and he made the arguments in good faith. And basically, America breaks up into Blacktopia, which is basically like an actual utopia. Then there's Geisha, which is California. That's exactly what it sounds like. And then there's Caucasia, which is like the Northeast and stuff. And it's like
Yeah.
this lame Renaissance fair, basically. Um, and there are people like Geisha is filled with straight couples who are interracially married who are pretending to be gay so that they can stay together, and they're hooking up in dirty bathrooms like gay couples in the 80s. Um, and like but the geisha becomes this horrific total, and they claim Hitler, by the way. The geisha claims Hitler for themselves because they Hitler was in love with the this Jewish boy who rejected him, so he became they unironically claim Hitler for themselves as like a positive role. But they become totalitarian and military expansionists because they need more people. Um, Meanwhile, Blacktopia is just like they're operating on sound magic and like everything is great. But there's various people that are dissatisfied in all these people, and they run to the middle, which is I guess Texas, and is still like no man's land. And they basically reconstitute the spiritual core of America. Um, but one of the black guys who leaves Blacktopia is the he's like 95% black, but he is like the great 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 grandchild of a white Southern general. And it is that white Southern general and the martial spirit, the grandeur of that white Southern general, who this almost entirely black character feels the greatest connection with, and who most looks up to, and who he most wants to emulate. And
There's a Tom Rails video on this where he makes the point that your Y DNA haplogroup is not actually super relevant to what your total DNA is. Like if one of if my like great to the power 10 grandfather somehow got marooned in Africa after having the line that produced me, and like you know, had a kid in South Africa and their line continued to the present, we would share the same Y haplogroup, right? Provided that male line had come down, but genetically we would be completely distinct from one another. We don't have anything in common except for that ancestor. But then he also points out that well, if you're trying to inhabit the worldview of the Indo-Europeans, right, patrilineal descent is all that matters, right? Like your actual genetic similarity to somebody is not relevant. It's who is your father's father's father is. So he's like, in a way, we've kind of come right back round to that very ancient pre-genetic understanding of identity. Now that we understand what a haplogroup is, now that you can actually say, I am definitionally descended from that group, from that guy, right? And
yeah,
obviously, one of the ways that we track the Indo-European migrations coming in is by variations in Y haplogroups. I haven't ever done a DNA test of that kind. Let's put it that way. But the yeah, I'm always kind of curious because on the one hand, it would be cool to know, but on the other hand, thinking that it actually determines anything is itself kind of against the spirit of what we're trying to look into. It's like,
yes.
I identify very strongly with my kind of my Anglo-Saxon English roots, right? Um, if I were to find out that genetically I was actually almost purely Celtic, right? Would that change anything?
You
I
look
mean,
a
like,
little
no, not
Celtic, by
really.
the way.
I mean, I could do the whole cope and be like, well, they're both descended from the Battle Axe culture anyway. But like, take it one back, like
Yeah.
my uh there's a strong suspicion of a significant amount of Jewish ancestry in my family coming from somewhere, right? We don't know where. There's nowhere that it can actually have come in from, but just basically just from the way that my mother's side of the family look, right? My mother and my grandmother both look kind of Jewy, right? Pretty Jewy, right? And so there's this like long running kind of family idea that there's some Jewishness in there somewhere, right?
Well,
Um, which
m
doesn't bother me at all, even though I'm on the
yeah.
right,
My
Like,
one of my other favorite historical stories that my dad and I used to we would listen to this guy named Steve MacDonald, who would write music about ancient Scottish history, basically. And
yeah.
one of the characters that was a whole album subject was Somerled, 8th century Scottish Western Isles warlord, who basically kicked the Vikings out
Yeah, yeah.
for good, essentially. And but the punchline with Somerled was that he was half Viking. He was not pure Scot. He was half. Um, and so like
Well, I mean, the last leader of the Comanche was Quanah Parker, right? He's like three quarters white American by blood.
yeah. So
Because
like
different groups of people reckon ethnic descent and belonging differently,
right.
right?
Someone sent me a
Bill
video of
Clinton's black, for instance, right? I don't make the
right.
rules, but I've been told that Bill Clinton was the first black president, right? I'm not going to tell the African American community that they're not
Yeah.
allowed to call Bill Clinton black if they want to.
Right. But you know that you don't get a felon president until you get Trump. So, you know, how are you gonna um yeah. I mean this goes back to book 5 of the Iliad too. You know, well, why do you ask me of my ancestry? Oh, the generations are like leaves from the tree, one falls away and another one comes to replace it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um
There's a bit in one of the Pindar odes, which we really can finish on this because you said you need to go like half an hour ago.
sorry,
And
yeah.
the sun has now come up here as well. Uh, there's one of Pindar's odes, and one of the main things that Pindar did was he wrote commemorations for Olympic victors,
Mm.
and
Oh, cool.
I would reread the section on Pindar again if you get the chance from Such Breeding because he's talking about the concept of physis of nature and how it arises, and he says it's not just the case that like your nature is what you're the way that we use it today, like you have your nature, I have my nature, humans have human nature, like nature is seen as this animating vital force, and he makes the point that I think you really appreciate about Achilles swearing on the living wood rather than the dead scepter, right?
Yes.
Um, but so in Pindar, he's drawing out this theme that like it's not just the case that different men have different natures. It's that some men have more nature than other men, and
Ah,
in the moment of truth, that nature kind of rises up from them irresistibly. And he's talking about a specific, I think it was an Olympic boxer, and in his panegyric like praise poem of this Olympian victor, he says, his father was of no note, but his grandfather had been a great boxing champion, and in this man, that same nature which had lain dormant in the father has now erupted and given him the victory. And it's a very similar idea. Like,
interesting.
and again, these ideas of like heredity, because we all see this, right? Like I talked about my own phenotype a little bit. Like my everybody else in my family, with the exception of me, right? So all my brothers and sisters and everybody on my father's side of the family are enormous, right? My brother's 6'5", my dad's 6'4", my sister's 5'9", something like that. I'm 5'8", right? So I'm the shortest member of my generation, right? My son is very very skinny and very 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 long, like already. Like he's been an underweight baby his whole life, but he's tall. He's going to be tall. So like this pattern of heredity, right? That and again, this is kind of part of the argument of selective breeding in the birth philosophy is that this understanding of heredity coming from a pastoral so you take a pastoralist society and you impose them as the aristocracy over an agricultural society that's providing them a surplus. So they're kind of LARPing as their ancestors. They're kind of doing what we're doing. It's like, well, what do we do? Well, we raise racehorses and we go to war a lot, and we're very different from the peasants who, every now and again we just turn up at their doorstep with a spear and demand grain. In Hebrisius's drinking song, which I think I've shared before, right?
Mhm.
This is my tool, the spear. I squeeze my wine, I pound my grain. Everybody who does not have a spear must turn to me and call me master and great lord. Right. So like this idea, but according to Bap's kind of model, only in that confluence of a group of people who know a lot about breeding animals, who are also living in kind of militarized idleness, only then can the preconditions for an understanding of there being a nature that is separate from custom, because you have different customs to the people that who are providing for your livelihood effectively,
Mhm.
right? So it's very obvious every day that different groups of people have different customs, and but also that you have different natures, right? And that comes from the idea of from this breeding idea, from the the fact that like the Greek cultural concept of like the life force, the chi, was seen to behave in the same way as dissent.
Hmm.
Right. I'm not actually paraphrasing Bat there. I'm kind of making my own version of his argument, which I think is supportable on its merits. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously,
I
I've got my differences with this as well, but
yeah. There's like I hate taking a Marxist argument that I feel like has zero validity in most of its application, but might have an application here that's valid, which is standpoint theory. Like, I don't think the aristocratic class is in greater touch with the true nature of nature, um,
it's
because
not
so
it's not
often
even
they're
about them
much
being in touch with it. It's about somebody had to come up with that idea first, and that idea is much more likely to arise in this context. And incidentally, the whole Marxist standpoint theory importing class conflict in uh, is explicitly mentioned in Selective Reading and the Birth of Philosophy because he
oh
does
good okay.
extended coverage of the character of Critias.
I read like 60 or 70 pages of it, but it was a couple years ago. I have it on my
Yeah,
shelf. I should return to it at some
it
point.
it's actually a pretty nippy read. I was surprised
I
by
enjoyed it.
how quickly I got through it. Yeah, but so
I didn't
Critias.
finish it though.
When he's talking about philosophy specifically and the project of Plato specifically, he makes a lot of reference to Critias, who was one of Socrates' students,
Right,
who was like the ancient Greek Hitler. Like everybody agreed the worst thing you could possibly be was Critias. And
right.
so he sees a lot of the project of the post-Socratics as being how can we maintain our Socratic teachings, but do it in a hidden way so that the people don't turn on us the way they turned on Socrates,
Yeah.
right?
He takes
And
a sort of super Straussian view where he's
yeah,
like he's hiding his true beliefs in plain sight by disguising them as just a back and forth where Socrates is victorious, but he's making the the stronger
yeah,
arguments in the mouth of the person who
Cal
loses the argument.
Callicrates,
So
Callicrates, yeah,
right, but like yeah, I get that. And I actually almost made a similar argument
yeah, yeah.
in defense of hatred, actually, where a friend of mine who was editing it recommended I take that section out, because I was making a similar argument with
Well,
Shakespeare's Gentlemen of Verona.
I,
Um,
I've had this discussion back way back when we first started talking. We got to talking about Plato, and my contention is that every smart person who reads Plato realizes that he's not trying he deliberately doesn't want you to take him at face value, and then you split, right? So
yeah.
there are stupid people like Karl Popper who thinks that actually Plato thinks that all this stuff is inherently good in and of itself. He wants
Or
this like
maybe Karl Popper, we can 4D chess this. Maybe Karl Popper was arriving at Costin's conclusion before
I
Costin.
I don't think Karl Popper is intelligent enough to arrive at that conclusion.
I
Uh,
know, I'm kidding.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. but
but you could take it full circle. We
yeah,
could
yeah,
make
yeah.
this
So
an
so
accelerating rock
so
paper
so you,
scissors
you
game
take
of
you take your Plato, right?
yeah.
And either you're like, yes, this is the origin point of everything, quote unquote, bad in Western culture, and it's bad, right? And he literally wants this, right? Like this,
Hmm.
the Platonic Republic, or you take the position that I used to take, which is, well, this is clearly an allegory for different sorts of human being and different sorts of soul, they specifically say they're looking to find what a just man is, and only then will they consider the city because they're looking for the solution to what is a just man, right? Right. So I always took it as this kind of allegorical because taking it as an actual plan for like how to build a society is so absurd, right?
It's
And
nonsense. Yeah.
then there's the Baptist view, which I'm now more convinced of than my old view, which is that he's doing this kind of hiding
Super
his own views in
Straussian.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like I mean, I think texts are often amenable to being read in multiple ways. So I think you can read it
Yeah.
as an allegory for the human being and that. And then there's your position, which is that he's trying out a bunch of different things that contradict each other and seeing which one fits, right?
A little bit, and I think the primary purpose of the text is to walk people through different um, forms in the Platonic sense, different structures of arguments, including the fallacies, which are introduced very in a simple manner in book one in the Thrasymachus part, but which become more complex as you move through the books. And but the ultimate conclusion at the end is in enjoining the reader, and I got this view partially from Greg Johnson, um, of the value of inquiry itself.
Is that the
And
Arctos, Greg Johnson?
it's Countercurrents, Greg Johnson.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
He
That's a
wrote,
deep cut. Like for a
yeah.
guy who's not a fascist, you know a lot of fascists. Just,
I've been on podcast. I wrote for him for 2 years. Um,
yeah.
on my pieces on Countercurrents are still up. But like there is an injunction to become a private man. And what's so fascinating about Plato is in the Apology, Socrates very explicitly compares himself to Achilles in a favorable manner, not favorable to Achilles, but like I'm like Achilles,
Yeah.
Achilles is good. And he very subtly throws shade at Odysseus. He's very much an Iliad guy and not an Odyssey guy. But in Plato, in the Republic, you see Plato speaking more. One has to be careful saying his opinion because it's very hidden, but he seems to praise Odysseus in the Myth of Air section at the end for choosing the life of the private man who others would not have chosen.
Well, of course, a
And
private man is an idiot. Idiotes is a
yes, but idiot not in the with the modern connotation.
well,
Uh,
no,
uh,
but the modern connotation comes from who won that argument in the ancient Greek world, right? Like, and again, this is kind of
I think
relevant
the
to
connotation comes from like we think someone who is not following current events doesn't know things.
no, I think there's more than that. So this gets into the whole like man as a political animal thing. But and
Hmm.
again, there's a section in Such Breeding About Philosophy that talks about this question. The idea that a human being is only fully actualized when they are acting politically, which a lot of pro-democracy people really like that. Like, oh yeah, man is a political animal. That's the only line that they've ever read from that text. They don't understand the rest. But the point that's being specifically made, according to Costner's reading, is no, 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 no. Like in Nietzsche says, you know, every living being seeks to accumulate and discharge its strength, right? When we say man is a political animal, we say that you can only reach your full flourishing as a human being by exerting power.
Yeah. Well, this
Like
is
it's a power. It's almost the opposite of the democratic thing. Like, oh, man is a political animal. That's why I have to make sure to vote for the people I like in the elections. Like, no, man is a political
that's not
animal. This is why
power.
you have to form a manabund of like six
Yeah.
to 30 guys and try and take over your local state. Like, that's what he means by man is a
Yeah.
political animal.
Well, I mean, I think there's dimensions of the experience of power, and Costin, I think, at his most poetic in Bronze Age mindset, really captured this in his description of the glorying in one's own power as captured by the birds flying and doing aerial acrobatics in the waterfall. Do you remember that
Yeah, yeah.
section? Like,
Uh,
there's nothing
I
political in
do
that.
actually.
There's nothing.
That's very Nietzschean though, because Nietzsche talks about
Yes.
like the mating of eagles, right?
Yes, and it's like there's nothing political in that, and I think this is actually the
Well,
heart
no, no,
of
no, no.
what
There
Plato
is
is.
something very political in that.
Well,
Like
but
the because I don't think that the if you pull up a picture in your head of your political enemy, your worst political enemy, do they want people to be strong and beautiful?
that's
And do they
making
think
something that is
and do
not
they think
political out of it.
and
I mean, you can.
do they think that society should be ordered in such a way as to prioritize the needs of the strong and the beautiful or the weak and the ugly?
So
Right?
w-
You can't
in
get away from
in
these
the right
questions.
in the right hypothetical situation, every aspect of every object in existence can be made into political. The exploration of space is political. Everything is political. Marriage is political. My penis is political. Freaking, whatever. But whether something is essentially political is different. And I think the essence of the political, not just in the Carl Schmittian sense, but in the phenomenological sense, is the social dynamic of power between people. And what Nietzsche is talking about in the experience of power is not inherently social. It can be the experience of
Like physical strength.
riding a fast car or pushing a barbell up. Yeah, those kinds of things. And I think the making it is exactly this point of the lust for political power, the what's the Latin phrase? The libido dominandi, right?
Yeah.
Is actually the primary target of Plato's Republic, with the ring of Gyges being the model for this, and the corrupting influence of this. It's treated as a kind of demonic force that possesses you, and this is actually introduced in a very subtle metaphor by Cephalus in Book One, where Socrates asks him, this old man, hey, can you still, what's it like being old? Can you still have sex? Can you
Oh, and he
still,
say it's such a relief to not
to
have to
not
worry about
have
that. Yeah.
this lesser, but the comparison, the connection between power and sex is made in the myth of Gyges itself. And
Yeah,
then,
because he uses the invisibility to have sex with the
right,
king's wife or something, right?
precisely. And Plato's argument that he works to in books 8 and 9, that the tyrant is the least free man of all. He's the man to be most pitied. Which you can take as a, like, oh, clever Straussian hiding the real thing in plain sight, and we're just covering our tracks here. Um, but it so correctly maps onto the psychology of addiction. And this is something Costin talks about too in his podcast. When he talks about, or not in his podcast, in Bronze Age Mindset, where he talks about Hillary Clinton and other people
Yeah.
who have nothing in their eyes. They're addicts, right? I read Plato's Republic primarily as a way to stave off addiction. And the addiction to climbing the political ladder is the the nominal object, but it really extends to all kinds of other forms of addiction. It could be sexual addiction, could be gambling, could be drugs, could be all kinds of things. But the dominion of the logos over the thumos and the appetites is like the way to offset that addiction. And political power is this addictive force that can ruin our ability to see and to choose the correct kind of life. And that's made,
Yeah.
like, kind of explicit in the myth of air at the end, where the man who was raised in the just city, but who is only just because of habit. And this is like the ultimate death blow to the stupid pauper take. Um, when he's choosing his next life, because he didn't live philosophically, only by good habit, he chooses the life of a tyrant, which results in him killing and eating his own son. And he sees his fate before he inhabits that future body, and he's gnashing his teeth and ripping his hair out, but there's nothing he can do. He's already chosen, and then he's born into that life. um and the visual does seem to set up the tyrant as someone who is quite
That
dramatically unenviable, because
that
his own inner
I think
parts are at war with each other.
I think maybe not enough is made of the opposition between Plato and Aristotle, um, in it kind of in every aspect. In a sense, you could almost say they were like opposites of one another. But the thing about, oh, he was only good by habit, right?
Hmm.
It seems quite contrary to, I'm pretty sure it's the Aristotle quote where he says that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts.
It's Heraclitus.
Heraclitus. Okay.
Mhm.
Um,
But
because
Heraclitus begins that quote by saying, "The soul's dyed at the color of your thoughts. Therefore, think only on those things that are in line with your principles, and can bear the light of day. Your thought becomes habits, and your habits become character. Day by day, what you choose is who you become."
yeah, which would seem to be sorry, it was Heraclitus, not Aristotle. Although I stand by what
But
I said in the
Aristotle is
intro.
still a habit oriented virtue ethics guy. I
Yeah,
do think
that's
Plato
why I got
laid
them
the
mixed up.
groundwork for that, though. When Plato says habit in talking about the man who lives in the just city, he's not talking about a internal logos ordered choice. He's talking about an externally constructed system.
Like
Like,
a mediator. Yeah, yeah.
if there's a difference between, I have a lot of strength because I'm living in an exoskeleton of AI
Yeah,
powered
yeah.
Tesla thing, but as soon as I get out of that exoskeleton, I'm a blob, right?
Well, this
Whereas
kind of gets
someone,
into the well, you can't legislate morality thing, and there's a
yes,
controversy specifically among like right-wing Christians of like
I just did a
because
reel
there's
about this.
yeah, I know you did, but about like oh, we can't have political power, man, because Christ's kingdom is not of this world. Like, and then the Christian nationalists being like, well, yes, but if we can build a society where babies aren't getting killed all the time versus one where they are, then the first one is better, right? Like,
How about not focusing on what you should or should not do in the grand sense and just do good within your power.
yeah, but
Just
yes, but that
like
again, you can't
and
escape from the
I say
question
that
because one
that
of the powers that you might have might be running for a political position. I,
exactly. Yes.
it, you know,
I mean not getting caught up in the questions of like should we even be doing this?
like
Like
so in the context of the
yes.
UK, for instance, uh, Islam, political Islam, is extremely powerful in a UK context. There's
Right.
a group of about six MPs who owe their position entirely um, to organization like and political mobilization of the Muslim community, specifically the like South Asian Pakistani Muslim community. And like to the point that they are seriously threatening a number of Labour Party seats. They've already got six seats. They're founding their own party, um, and this kind of weird ally, weird alliance between like the very old school radical left and radical Islam. And
Just
the
freaking
count
wild
yeah, yeah,
to me.
but and the counterpoint from like in a UK Christian context is like there are so many more Catholics than there are Muslims in this country. There are a lot there there are significantly more Christians than there are Muslims in Britain,
That doesn't
but
matter.
they're
Bec-
politically not they're not politically
yeah.
active,
Well, and it's
right?
not there's a Talebian asymmetry in
Yeah, the
just
intolerant
how
minority wins, right?
yes, the
But
incorrigible
yeah, yeah.
minority, yeah.
But and so I've had you'll get people being like, "Oh no, man, like Christians shouldn't be like doing a heck in politics, man, because his kingdom is not of this world." I'm just like, your bishop should tell you how to vote.
Well,
Anyway,
if your
I
kingdom's
am
not of this world, then like why are you bothered by people doing things in this world, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a hypocrisy to even expressing the concern,
Yeah.
but
I
that's
have
not
very strong Christian principles, but I would never act according to them, you know. Anyway,
excellent. Yeah.
it is. We've now been on this for 2 hours.
2 hours. Oh man. Oh, I should
It's,
probably
it's
head to bed. Yeah.
no, it's been
Um,
a really good conversation, man. I'm glad we got to catch up, and
absolutely, man.
yeah, I hope some of my rambling is of use to anybody who watches the recording. Please don't watch the recording. But no, I had a good time, and hopefully I'll
Yeah,
see.
man.
Hopefully the next time I manage to make it on the early morning, there'll be some of the other guys around to say hi to. I
Yeah,
know
I
everybody's.
think
Yeah,
some
he's doing
high
an
level
MBA, isn't
school.
he? I do find it
Yeah.
kind of interesting that like when he was doing super high speed, low drag stuff off the Horn of Africa, he had more time for this, like
Yeah.
as opposed to being at
It's
uni,
funny.
which
Yeah. It's funny how that works, but anyways,
yeah.
we'll catch up. I will if you want to throw those books in the Telegram, I will write those down and put them in my
When you say throw
Amazon.
in the Telegram, I can actually get you internet copies because I haven't paid for a book in a very long time.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
but
What?
yeah, I'll drop the titles in after we hang up, and then if
Okay.
you
I
see
might
anything
buy them anyways, just because I
yeah,
like
well, this is the
physical.
thing. Like, I'm a bit of a fan of BAP, as you know, but I don't want to give a guy who's already being funded by Peter Thiel more money. So I
Fair.
steadfastly refused to sign up for his podcast. So I only listen to the free half. I've got a buddy who incidentally is like a tradcath as well. I find it kind of interesting that he's at least nominally anti-Christian, but his stuff really appeals to a certain like set of Christian guys. Um, but yeah, so he's paid for a membership, so I might get him to sling me full length versions of stuff. But I don't need it. It's just a filler for when I'm in the car. Anyway, have a good
All
evening,
right.
man.
You too, man. Take care.